YouTube, folks? It's your friendly spirit of the Wolf Bushwicken, and as you all know, I got 2 free rototillers. Those of you who've been tuning in, please look back if you're new. Keep you up to speed. Anyways, I got them for free. For all of you who know what Fraser and Graham Page is, you know that these things are not worth really anything. Excuse me anymore. They're pretty much worthless. I got these for free, but I do like these things. And for those of you who are familiar with these and have used them will know they're real workhorses. But if you're not a mechanic, which I highly suggest you get, if it interests you to get mechanical skills, and I hope you take something out of my videos, because if you get one of these just as a collector because you like it, excuse me, sorry, blowing my nose, but you don't want to do safety and do the mechanical work, take here's an example. Take the see that magneto in there? That's for the Graham Page, I believe, by the way. But those are like, if you don't have the mechanical skills to do it yourself and you ship them out to somebody else, they're like $400 just to rebuild, which makes these pretty much worthless, and they're not worth the $400 to put into them, because if you're thinking you can get some of these for like cheap or free, these Frasers and Graham Pages, and say you don't want, like I said, you don't want to do the work yourself, and you end up paying the $400 and you want to flip them, don't ever suspect. Don't even bother, because don't even expect to get $400 out of these. These machines just are worthless as all get out. They're neat, but they're worthless. And so that's just a tip I would give anyone who's about to buy a machine. You know, factor that in, that some of these machines, they're old and they're cool and you don't see too many of them, but they're just practically worthless. I believe Graham Page still makes parts for these. If you look, you can still find parts for them. I found a guy who deals in parts for these, and I'm going to use him when I get the parts for the other stuff. But you can get parts for these direct from the company OEM. If you're willing to pay that money. And for those of you who don't know, before I do fully get into this carburetor, Fraser, as you all know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the Fraser Tiller Company, which these started out as, was a farm equipment company, is what they were called. Was a branch off of the Kaiser Fraser vehicle manufacturer, and it was their way of recouping some of the loss for all the automobiles they made, because they weren't making enough money in automobiles. But then they thought about it and they said, well, farm equipment always sells, because farmers are always needing a rototiller for their garden or whatever. And I'm sure there's farmers that used something like this back in the day when they bought it new to do their whole hayfield. Is not entirely unthought of, because back in those days when you couldn't afford much. So I think that was their reasoning behind doing this. But as you know, all things, companies die out. One of the these are neat and I really like these, but one of their biggest downfall is that probably a lot of people mistaked, is that these are 2-cycle, and that is not always fun to have to mess with the gas mix, get the right gas mix, and use the right oil for it, because these can be very sensitive. If you don't use a certain type of oil for them, they're really sensitive. The recommended oil in something like this, if you are into these, I recommend using, because they're very sensitive like that. Too rich and they just don't want to run worth a darn. Anyways, so that was kind of their downfall, but it wasn't over for the company, because Graham Page came along and said, I'll buy you out, and probably gave him a hefty chunk. But as far as the Kaiser Fraser car company, that's a thing of the past. That car company is pretty much dead in the water. I don't even know if the factory where they were making them still exists or not. It's a shame because that was a that company had, you know, ideas for cars, but I don't think their ideas were that good. Because what they were trying to do was make cars with aerodynamics, and that just doesn't work out. But anyways, I've ranted long enough about that. Now to move on to the carburetor. So let's get into the teardown. This video is going to be quite lengthy, so let's hope you can see it. You're going to see it there. I wonder if I can prop you up here, if you're going to see. I think I can, because what I can do is move the carburetor over to this area and move the rest of this junk out of here. Sorry, my lighter and everything. Hope that doesn't incriminate me, but oh well. It's Vermont and it's legal when I'm smoking in it, so and I don't think it will, because it's legal here in Vermont. And it's not like I'm smoking it on camera, so kudos to that. Anyways, let's see what we can do. We'll pull this carburetor, and I'm going to show you the steps to taking the carburetor apart. That's what this video is about, really. But I thought I would give you a backstory on the corporation. So you see here, if this carburetor is mounted to the manifold for the carburetor, that is over there. I'll show you in another video. But anyways, you need a, I believe it's 7/16. Quote me if I'm wrong. No, it's 1/2. You need a 1/2 wrench, as y'all can see right there, to pull these out, and they have a little lock washer on them. And then your gasket is right here. I tend to just leave this gasket on, and that's what I'm going to do for this purpose. Because I think I'm going to rebuild this, but I might not swap that gasket out. Because this gasket right here doesn't usually tend to wear out that much. Sometimes they can if they get nicked, but if you're careful with them, they don't usually tend to wear. But you always want to make sure that you replace any internal gaskets, just because, you know, that's very imperative. So anyways, now you have, I'm missing a screw here, so there's typically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 screws for this. One's been pulled. I think that screw fell out and is in the bin. So I think I remember pulling it because I had to pull it for the mounting for the carburetor, for the throttle cable, for the throttle, choke cable, all that deal to the carburetor. And that's why that's out. And that's why this one was already loose. But these are what they look like. They got little lock washers on them, and they're Phillips head. You'll see this on a lot of older equipment like this, because these are the kind of style they had back then for carburetor screws. As you get later, you will see them more like a flatter round and not like that style. I don't know the best way to describe what style of screw head that is, other than it's like a rounded screw, but it's a weird rounded screw, and you'll notice the difference in some of the later equipment that Briggs did and stuff. That's got a slightly different style screw head. That's kind of rounded, but more like a mushroom top, I guess, actually would be the best way to describe the Briggs version, and this isn't really a mushroom top. But anyways, so you move this. You can remove these if you want to clean these, but because it's on the throttle plate, I'm not going to. I don't typically mess with those too much. I like to leave the adjustments inside the carburetor. I don't know if you can see it, but see right there, there's 2 screws. If you go to replace this, if your plate's broken in any way, or your throttle, those are the 2 screws to pull out. But let me tell you, these are very hard to get right, to get back in first. So I always suggest, if you have to go this route of removing this, which I'm not going to do, I'm just showing you. You would definitely want to do it with this part, with the top side of the carburetor not attached to the bottom of the carb, because it's a pain. It really is. Sometimes I fight with these a little bit until I can get them to line up, and then you end up losing screws in there because it's such a narrow area. And I also recommend, which I've discovered to make this easier, or at least for me it's a little difficult, is a magnetic screwdriver. So they end up sticking. But anyways, that's that. So now we'll pull our final screw out. Or not our final screw, but our next screw. Then this will be our final screw after this one. So we got one more right there. So like I said, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. About 5, 6 screws in this. Yeah. 2, 4 is 6. 6 of them. So when you're pulling this apart, just keep that in mind. There's 6 screws. I like to lay them out in order, as you have noticed, because I believe that the screw wears on the threads differently for each one as it's torqued down. But that's totally up to you if you do that. I mean, I guess it wouldn't really matter. I just think that, you know, you risk it not going in as easy because the threads are different. So keep that in mind. You may want to have them lined up in order. That's just a force of habit of mine, and maybe it's just me, but so as we're breaking down this carburetor, you'll see I'll pull this out, and there's this little gasket right here, which you have to pull off. See the pin? There's a pin in there. You have to pull the float out first before you can pull this gasket off. And as you can see, the gasket on these are cut like the float, and the floats are a little different on this one. Instead of a single round float on the later stuff, it's like a double weighted float, and it kind of just does this number as a regular float does. It goes up and down, but it's double weighted, and it kind of balances the fuel flow on both sides, I believe is what that's for. Quote me if I'm wrong. It's something to do with the balance of the fuel flow on these. And if you don't have, if I remember correctly from working on these over the years, if you don't say if you open this up and one of these is missing, you'll want to get a new float, because you don't have that counterweight on one side for the fuel flow, and it just ends up dumping into one chamber, which I believe what it does is it blocks off, like if one goes down first before the other, it kind of blocks off one chamber so the fuel is evenly distributed versus just dumping all into one chamber like that. But I could be wrong about that, so please feel free to correct me if I am, but I'm pretty sure that's what its purpose is. I'm not a master mechanic by all means, so I'm not 100% familiar with the purpose of them, but I try to describe them in the best way I can. See if I can get this pin to go out of here. You will also notice on this carburetor, and I'll show you in a minute what I'm talking about, because this might confuse you at first if you're not familiar with this type of carburetor, but you'll notice that it still has the tab right there, and that kind of like pushes up on the needle a little bit, but you'll notice the needle on these type of carburetors, and here I'll show you what I'm talking about, does not have a head for a clip, for the clip that holds onto the carb. So this does not hold onto the carb. What it does is it kind of just like grabs this, and that kind of just pushes it up a little bit, rubs up on it a little bit and pushes it up to make the flow through the needle. Some of the common problems with these type of needles is you'll notice if it's not running and say it's dumping fuel and this needle's in here, is that the needle's gummed and it's stuck down in there. So oftentimes you might have to pull this apart to pull that O-ring out. There's an O-ring in here, and for this purpose I am going to take that O-ring out. This is the gasket I'm telling you about. See, it's got the hole for the round, and then that's where your where your float goes, and those are for the two chambers, the float weights for their chambers, because it cuts off these when it goes up, and it keeps the even balance of fuel going through the bowl so it doesn't flood to one side, like I said. For this one, I believe is 7/16. Yep, for this is 7/16, so I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get one. And that is where your O-ring is for your that's where your O-ring is for your needle. That's the O-ring that's where the O-ring lives for your needle. So when you want to pull the O-ring out, you just undo that, and it just unscrews, and you can put your new O-ring in there. So right here you have a gasket that goes to that sits between that sandwich. The gasket goes on there, and then it sandwiches down. And then when you go to put it back, of course, reverse process. This right here is, I'll take this apart for this, is another orifice you'll want to clean. It has another one of those gaskets. And down in there is a needle valve that cleans. And what you do with that, it's basically like a lot of these carburetors. You've probably seen it, but I'll show you what you do with it. Is you take your screwdriver, I can get it out of there. And you gotta, sometimes you'll have to play around and find your favorite screwdriver to use on this, because the hole being the size it is. That hole is very tiny, so I'm gonna get another screwdriver because that hole, however the way it is. You don't want a screwdriver that's too small, but you don't want a screwdriver that's too big either. I think I'm breaking this seal pretty much on it, so now it's just a matter of getting it up. And so I'm using a slightly smaller screwdriver for that. This is a pretty tiny one. Normally I wouldn't recommend that because, it's not quite big enough. But because, like I said, I broke the seal on it, it should be fine now. And this should come out easily. You can usually, if these are stripped, tell that somebody else has probably been in this carburetor, because when they're stripped like that, somebody else has worked on it and they effed it up because they didn't do it right. And I'm not trying to rag on anyone like that, but just keep that in mind, because it isn't rocket science to these, and you can strip them out either. So somebody wasn't using the right tools and they stripped them out, or they waited too long to rebuild it because it was so gummed up it wouldn't come out, and then you could almost pretty much render that carburetor useless unless you can clean that orifice without having to pull it out. So keep that in mind. Just remember, use your tools wisely and avoid that stuff, because that's a pain when that happens. It is definitely not fun at all. In the factory, they don't so much have to worry about that because they have a specialty tool for putting these in, but now I would love to find a tool like that, but I doubt I ever will. As you can see, I kind of Almost marred this one up a little, but not bad enough to where it affects it. This is the valve that I pulled out, and surprisingly, this valve, if you can see really in the minute holes you probably can't see, is I think it's pretty clean. Yeah, it is, because I can see through them. You just have to look at it right. But you probably won't pick it up on camera, because that's more like a in-person thing, I've noticed. Because a lot of people working on stuff like this, you know, say, can you see that on the camera? What they don't realize is that for most of the people viewing the video, you're probably not going to really see that because of that factor. So I need to get a 7/16 wrench. I'll be right back. There's a nut right there, and I'll show you what that's for, since how we're going all deep with this pull apart. I just want to show you all the different functions of the things. So that is 7. So, like I said, again, where is it? 7/16 wrench. This is a cobalt wrench for all of you who are wondering what this is. I bought it cheaply at Lowe's. Not a sponsor at all, but just to let you wonder what I'm using. I have a bigger 7/16 somewhere, but I feel I have lost it, so I'm not 100% sure what happened to it. That nut does not want to come out, so I might have to put it in the vise. Remember, when you're putting something in the vise like this, do not snug it down as tight, because you don't want to end up breaking this pot metal. That's pretty much what this is. Just enough to where you can use it, but you don't want to break it, because then if you break something, you risk ruining the carburetor. So just keep that in mind. Do not snug on it, but you can put it in there enough to where it loosens the part like I just did. Just being careful of that. If you scratch it a little bit, it's not an end of the world deal. Just like I said, you don't want to end up breaking anything on pot metal, because it's almost apparent that you could scratch it a little, and that's not going to affect it if it has a little grooves. But I finally got that loose, and I will show you what it is. Again, this video is going to be pretty long, but this is another little passage that you want to clean. And if you see right on there, that's a copper screen on these older type carburetors. So it's always good to pull this part out and clean inside there, because I can see some grime in there right now. If you look closely enough, I don't know if you can see that. I think you can kind of see that. I think I'll get the flashlight, but if you can kind of see in there, see all that? That's grime you're going to want to clean out, because that had some gunk in it. So that's what I'll end up doing with this. Like I said, I might end up rebuilding this carburetor. You really don't have to if you clean like inside of there, which just looks pretty dirty to me. And inside in all the orifices, you can probably get away with not. And you can get away with using these older gaskets as long as they haven't seen too much wetness, because the wetness is the worst thing for them. Yeah, the fuel flows through there, but like if you get a certain amount of wetness on these gaskets, sometimes they can really wear out. Some of these older ones like this are pretty thicker and they're hardier. These are made thicker, so they're not, but still, you know, any paper gaskets like that in a carb, it just doesn't mix. So that's why I say when you're, and I probably mentioned this before, I had an old Ford garden tractor years ago, and the gasket that goes right here on the carb, but it was an old, like, it was the old black Chocomatic riding mower carburetors that didn't have the tank mount to the the gas tank didn't mount to the car, but it was the float bowl style chokomatics that they had that were often black, and it was on an old 70s 80s Ford garden tractor. And the person had where this gasket surface is, because if you know though, if those of you are familiar, and if I find one I will show you guys it, but it's like a little boot, L boot type thing, and it mounts here in the round carburetors there, for example. And on this end, this is where it goes into the block on the far end at the L shape right there. Anyways, where it met the block, and it has a gasket similar shape to this, they had used a paper gasket. It was a Kellogg's cereal box, and it did not last because the fuel flows through there so much that it just absorbed it and ate it away. So keep that in mind when you find these older ones with paper gaskets. Is try not to get too much stuff on them, because they can wear. Because these are paper gaskets, but these ones are made a little more durable because they're made thicker for the carburetor. Why they use paper gaskets, I don't know. I think you'll find a lot of them nowadays have like a rubberized coating gasket, which is a little bit better. But I don't think they used paper gaskets or metal gaskets, which some heads had back in the day for the engine head gasket, because they were worried that this being pot metal, that it would just melt the sides and would leak everywhere. And who knows, they maybe tested that. But at the time, all they really had was stuff like this, because they didn't think of using the material that they used later, and like a lot of the chokomatic push mowers of the late 60s and early 70s, that little like nylon rubbery type gasket. They didn't think about that back then. But you will notice that a lot of like 80s road weed whacker carburetors tend to have one of those rubberized gaskets for, say, the top half of the carburetor, and then a paper gasket that sandwiches with it, which is weird, or two paper gaskets, which I mean is different. So they still technically used paper gaskets, but like I said, you know, that's one of their downfalls, is that paper gasket. Well, anyways, YouTube folks, so let's see. There is one more needle here, but I think this is a fixed. Yeah, that's a fixed needle. So you'll want to shine that up a little bit. I hope this has helped any YouTubers working on the old model YC9A Tilson Toledo. I think Toledo is where it's made, and this is the model right here, yeah. It's a model YC9A Tilson, which you'll see on a lot of the Fraser and Graham page of this era. So I hope that's helped everybody on this type of carburetor. And here's different ports you'll want to clean out, of course, as usual. But that's pretty much the teardown of it. Other than that throttle plate. And pulling this out, which you'll want to make sure you clean, of course. And then there's another one of your fuel mixture screws. There's actually, I'm not going to pull that out, so I think I'm going to leave that alone, but there's actually, this is a needle valve that sometimes might need to be cleaned in there, but I'm not going to bother cleaning that if I don't have to, because I'd like to leave the adjustments alone on this carb so I don't have to screw with them. Because for those of you who are familiar with carburetors like these, or carburetors in general, you'll know that it's a pain it's a pain sometimes just to do the adjustments, and I would prefer not to have to mess with that, because I don't like doing it. It's getting the adjustment right and sitting there and taking the time. But anyways, YouTubers, enough of that. I think this is where I'm going to end it. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as I promised, I was going to get you another carburetor video. And as always, don't forget to keep your heads up, stay strong, all that kind of jazz. Don't forget to like, if you would please, comment if you, anything in general, but especially please, if you wouldn't mind, if you disliked my video, so I can make it better. And subscribe if you're new to my channel would be greatly appreciated, because and hitting that notification bell so you know when my videos are coming out. So you always get them right on the spot, because there are more videos to come and more stuff to be had. So just keep that in mind, and keep your heads up. Have an excellent time. Whatever it is, wherever you are, keep your heads up, stay strong, all that kind of jazz. And by the way, Happy New Year, folks, because it is officially the New Year 2020. And I can't say that enough. Happy New Year. I'm waiting to see what 2020 is going to bring us this year. So hopefully it's something good. Well, YouTube folks, sunshines, unicorns, and rainbows. See you on the flip side, YouTubers.